Welcome to 24 Hours of Pass, growing our community. We're excited you could join us today for Christopher Schmidt's session, You Rethink Your ETL with BIML. This 24 Hours of Pass event consists of 24 consecutive live webcasts delivered by up-and-coming speakers and experts from the Pass community. All sessions will be available next week on 24hoursofpass.com. My name is Neil Hambley. I'm the moderator for this session. I'm a Pass chapter leader for London, UK, and also the professional development VC chapter as well. I have a few quick introductory slides before I hand over the reins to Chris. He will then speak for approximately 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll move on to the final stage of Q&A, where we'll ask the final questions you may have. Chris, if you can move to the next slide, please.
Sure, Neil.
Okay. If you're having any issues, just type your question into the question pane on your GoToWebinar control panel, and somebody will assist you. To maximize your screen, use the Zoom button located in the top of the presentation window. Feel free to enter any questions you have in the Q&A field at any time, and we will take some of those questions throughout the session and the remaining ones at the end of the session. Once we get to the Q&A portion of the session, I will read off your questions to Chris, the speaker, and since all attendees are muted, you will need to submit all your questions by typing into the Q&A field. Note there will be a short evaluation at the end of this session. Your feedback is very important to us, so please take a moment to complete it, and it will show up on your screen as soon as the session ends. Next slide, please. I'd like to also take a moment to thank our presenting sponsors, Microsoft, Cisco, and Dell Software. In addition, I'd also like to thank our support sponsors, which are SQL Sentry, HP, and SolarWinds. The staging of these 24 Hours of Pass would not be possible without their support and dedication, and they are the reason this event is available free of charge. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to bring to your attention to the up-and-coming Pass Summit. Taking place in Seattle, Washington, from October 27th to October the 30th, Pass Summit 2015 will feature over 200 sessions from world-class SQL Server experts. Planned and presented by the SQL community, for the SQL community, Pass Summit is single-handedly the largest gathering of SQL Server and BI professionals. With over 5,000 attendees from around the world, Pass Summit is also a great place to network and meet face-to-face with those experts, peers, and MVPs. To find out more about Pass Summit, visit www.passsummit.com. You can contact your local chapter for a discount code to save $150 off the current price. Optimize your savings by registering before the next price change on Sunday, July the 12th. Next slide, please. So now please allow me to present the speaker of the hour, Chris Schmidt. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Chris, but he can explain to yourselves about himself also. So Chris is I've lost the slide, sorry. Chris is a business intelligence architect. He's a presenter at SQL Saturdays, local user groups, and also code camps. And he has a blog at the bintelligenceql.wordpress.com. Final slide, please. Actually, that was the last slide. Sorry, my apologies. I'm now going to hand over the presentation to Chris. Chris, it's yours to take away and have fun.
Great, thanks Neil. Welcome to this 24 Hours Pass session. My name is Christopher Schmidt, and this session will be all about BIML. So if you've been thinking about BIML or you're just hearing the word, this session will get you up to speed on what it is, how to use it, and why it's I think some really cool stuff. BIML is a language that was created by Verigence in late 2012. Verigence is a company based in the Southeast United States, and BIML stands for Business Intelligence Markup Language. It's an XML-based language that allows for code reuse and availability. And it targets a write once, target any. So unlike essentially every SSIS development that we've ever had to do within Visual Studio, we can change the destination version dynamically. So if you've been struggling with trying to support 2005 and 2008 and 2012 all within your environment, BIML can still handle that very, very easily to say, I want to target 2005 SSIS packages, or I want to target 2008 SSIS packages. So that's a really cool add-on little addition there to be able to just change that destination version and say, oh, I want to go to this separate version. You can use C# or VB.NET code nuggets to quote-unquote enhance the BIML code. And essentially once you've done this, this creates something called BIML script. And BIML script is a marriage between BIML and C# or VB.NET that allows you to do much more with BIML than we could just out of the box. So before we get, and we'll kind of come back and forth to this slide deck a little bit throughout the presentation, but as we start talking about this, why is BIML such a great thing for data warehouses in particular? So data warehouses are great just out of the box because most of our data warehouse and data mart work is in that ETL and moving the data between those various sources. Ralph Kimball and the Kimball Group estimate that this is about 70% of the entire data warehouse workload that we need to accomplish. So changing requirements, unclear solutions, this creates fractures between integration and reporting teams, and this is one of the main potential causes of failure of an enterprise data warehouse solution, is trying to keep all those people in sync and together. So data warehouse, data mart structures are nice. They're repeatable, right? They have a repeatable process. We know that a dimension is going to be a dimension and is going to fit to, and if I'm moving too fast, Neil, please feel free to tell me to slow down a little bit. But so data warehouses and data marts are repeatable, right? We know that no matter what happens into a dimension, that everything in that dimension is going to be kind of close to the same. The column names are going to change, but apart from that, we know that the processes around them are going to stay the same. We know that we're going to stick with type 1 and type 2. We might have a couple other kind of edge cases out there, but for the most part, everything that goes into a dimension is going to be a type 1 or a type 2 change, right? We know that we're going to have repeatable components within our data flow inside of SSIS even. So we know that as we create these repeatable SSIS templates that we're loading dimensions and facts with, we also have all these repeatable components inside of it. So we have the same conditional split component and the same update commands and the same row counters and source transformations. And we have these similar structures in the destination tables as well. And if you guys are anything like me, once you've done about 500 SSIS packages, you get to a point and you're like, okay, I've got it. It's the same process. I've done it over and over again, and you have a standard template that you use, right, for your dimensions, where you're just pulling this dimension in. You might change the source and the destination, but apart from that, you haven't really changed anything. You're just swapping in a different source query, and that's it, right? It's change the source query, remap the stuff in the destination, and you're done, right? It gets you to a point where you're rebuilding a dimension in a couple of hours. So BIML allows us to speed this up very, very quickly. So we're always trying to accomplish this ETL piece as quickly as possible. Business users and project stakeholders always have a hard time seeing the value in doing SSIS packages and doing ETL, right? It's always faster, faster, faster. How can you get that data in there quicker? And why does it take you a week to get this data into the data mart? Why can't it just be there, right? Why can't you just wave a magic wand and have it show up? So by using BIML, we can speed this process up in order to provide these clean SSIS packages in days that used to take us weeks to build. So now if we have a situation where we need to pull everything out of a source to a stage environment, or if we need to pull everything from staging into our dimension structures, we have our dimension structures built, we have the model built, all we really need is a way to build this very, very quickly, right? And then it just comes down to resources and constraints. So some of you may work for companies where it is all about, just building as many SSIS packages as you can as quickly as possible, right? And there's the notion of, well, we'll just throw more people at it, right? We'll add 8, 10, 12, 200 people to build SSIS packages if it'll get us 200 dimensions faster. Well, we all know as ETL professionals that that is a very challenging thing to accomplish, right? Especially to build them the way that we want and to build them the way that we want to see it. And so BIML allows us to get to a point where we can standardize this creation so that everything fits in to these corporate standards that we've adhered, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But first, going back to what BIML is. So on the first slide, I very briefly mentioned that BIML is an XML-based language. The good news is it's a very small XML-based language. There's not a whole lot to it, right? So we have up at the top, it's very hierarchical. We have a BIML schema up at the top, and at the root node, we can then create tables, packages, or connections. And most of what we'll be talking about today will be in this. I apologize. I was going to try to zoom in here, but it's wanting to zoom out on me first. So at the very top here, we're going to create our packages, right? And this is what we'll be talking about. The majority of the session today is creating packages, and in particular, an SSIS package. So everything kind of cascades into each other. We can create these tables over here, which is as we get to a more mature implementation with BIML, we can actually use it not just to create SSIS packages, but create the tables that SSIS is loading, or to create the stored procedures that BIML might need, or to create the connections that we'll need. There are many, many options that we have with that, and BIML is a very flexible, dynamic language. It also supports SSIS, that you can use it to build SQL Server Analysis Services multidimensional models. That's a little bit more uncommon, and so we won't be talking about that today. We're going to stick with the SSIS piece. All right, so BIML up at the top, we have...
Chris, I've got a...
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt you there, because I thought this might be a good one too. So, a couple of questions. One is, does BIML handle project or package parameters?
BIML handles both. It handles both project parameters and package parameters. Depends on what you want to do with it. There's another little piece in here that I left out, and I left out because I've designed this to be kind of an introduction level session, so I'm making an assumption that apart from hearing the word BIML, we have no experience with it at all. But you do have the ability that you can create project parameters, and you can create even package parameters to be able to call those. When we get to the actual creation of it, I will show how to create a project level connection. But apart from that, we won't go into creating like really custom stuff apart from that. All right. All right, so packages exist at either a multiple level or a single level, right? And inside of the single level, packages are made up of many different things. Packages are made up of tasks and events and variables and parameters and all kinds of different stuff, right? This is what allows us to do that. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit more later. Connections are pretty much any kind of connection that we might use to go outside of SSIS, right? We might have OLEDB connections, and we might have ADO.NET connections, or an ODBC connection. Oracle is very common as well, right? We might be pulling from Oracle. The great thing about BIML is it's very flexible and allows us to do any of those things. So we can change that source and look at that in all those different ways. All right. So going to the next slide, basic BIML. So most functionality that we've manually built in SSIS can be coded in BIML. And the question you have to ask yourself when you're setting out on your BIML adventure is, what are you trying to accomplish with BIML? Do you want to simply assist with a workload, or do you want to completely automate your data warehouse solution so that you never have to build another SSIS package in forever? You can do either. It's up to you. That's the freedom and the flexibility of BIML, of the BIML language. Another way to look at BIML is as a templates 2.0, if you will. So a lot of mature ETL shops have existing templates that we've already created, right? So if you're moving data from a SQL or from an Oracle environment to a staging environment, you just have to go grab the template and change it. Or if you're moving from staging to warehouse, right? We've already defined the dimensional structure that you have. All you have to do is plug in your new source query and you're good to go. Or from going from the data warehouse to the data mart. The downside of this is it's still time consuming, and the copy-paste functionality in SQL Server data tools, I think we'll all agree, is it's a little annoying. It's not as seamless as maybe it could be. And there's one key step here that we're going to talk about on the next slide, in particular with templates, that is a major, major gotcha, and that is to make sure you change those package IDs that get generated. As SQL Server data tools won't do that automatically for you, right? So you've generated a package ID, and then the next thing you know, you have 50 packages all running in production that have the same identifier, and it causes all kinds of problems later on. So that gets to be a pain. Another thing about templates is that they change, right? So over time, as you start out and as you build a template to get to just the first time around, maybe you start building an event handler, right? And when you first start building your event handler, you say, all we're going to track is the errors. So we're going to log all of our errors to a specific location. Once that happens, right, now you've got all this error data that you're collecting. And then you're looking at it and you say, well, it would be nice if we could look at package runtimes. So we want to look at the time a package started and the time a package stopped, and go that way. If you're using a template, you have to go back through all the packages that you've already built and add that in, right? It's not just as easy as, well, we'll do it for everything going forward. A lot of times it's, we want to go back and redo it. So it's in all of our packages. And the major downside of templates is you still have to build it. You have to plug in the source query and the destination table that you're pointing to and update your connection strings and your source settings and all that different stuff. So templates are great, but they still have some, we'll call them minor issues. Are they game stoppers? Probably not, but they're showstoppers to the point where we can do it a little bit easier and a little bit better. So BIML, on the other hand, doesn't have any copy-paste functionality. There's no need for it, right? You just dynamically change how you're going to push these packages in. If there's a standard change, so going back to our event handler example from earlier, so we've created this on-air event logging, and then we say we want to go back and we want to log pre- and post-execute runtimes. And that's working great for a couple of months, and then we say, you know, we really want to look at variable values too when they change, because we really want to see when that for each loop's running through. We want to see how much it's hitting. That's no problem. With BIML, you just regenerate all your packages. So what used to be a major project to go back and change every package that was in production to adhere to this new standard that you come up with, in BIML, it's just regenerate it. Another great thing about BIML is instead of having to store all your SSIS packages in source control, you just store the BIML code. So it becomes a much easier and simple way to manage your IT environment. And another great plus about BIML, so instead of building ETL packages all day, you can go do something else, like get coffee or writing presentations. So it all works out pretty well in your favor. And BIML is a great language. So now that we're kind of through the background of what is BIML and why do we care, let's go into actually doing some fun stuff, right? So let's go create some stuff. So we can create connections either at the package level or at the project level. I mentioned earlier, ODBC, flat files, Oracle, anything and everything is supported. Essentially, if you can do it in SSIS, you can do it in BIML. All SSIS really is at its core, if we just were to right-click on a package and click View Code, is XML, correct? So we can really reuse this to our advantage. So we declare connections in our connections element. And our connections element contains different attributes. So for example, if I were to create a connection to my source data, in this case we'll use AdventureWorks as our source, I would open up my connection string and then I would give it a name and I'd hit whatever the string is and then I'd type in the provider and then I would optionally include this create in project tab. And we don't want to just stare at this, so let's actually go, let's go write something. one thing you'll need before you start creating BIML packages is if you just right-click on inside of SQL Server Data Tools, and I'm going to be using 2010 for this example, but it doesn't matter. There's a version out there for 2008 or 2. There's a version out there for Visual Studio 2012. There's one out there for Visual Studio 2013. So don't feel like just because I'm using this one, if you're on a later version or an earlier version, this doesn't apply to you. But you need to go out to a website on CodePlex, and what we're looking for is BIDS Helper. So I'm just going to pull up BIDS Helper. And BIDS Helper is a free add-in that's available out on CodePlex that offers a lot of functionality. Creating BIML files, honestly, is one of the many options about BIDS Helper that you get. If you're a shop that uses SSIS multidimensional, there's a lot of SSIS multidimensional stuffs out there. I'm assuming everybody on this call probably has some exposure with SSIS because you're all here, right? So there's a lot of stuff inside of SSIS that helps you out too. But this is a tool that you'll need to have in order to start creating these BIML files. And there's all kinds of documentation out here about this. This is a great tool for many, many different things in the business intelligence development kind of toolkit. Excuse me. So once you have that downloaded, which you can do just by going to the downloads page and then selecting which version you want, you can see there's many options, so it's going to be whichever one you're looking for, all the way back to 2005. We're going to add this into our Visual Studio installation, and once we do that and we right-click on our project up here, or we right-click on our SSIS package level, we're going to see that there's this new option at the top, and it's called Add New BIML File. So if we click on this, it's just going to add a very simple file called bimlscript.biml. Nothing overly exciting about it, and not yet anyways. So I'm going to rename this one first, just in the interest of we're going to have several in here so we can kind of watch our progression as we go through the presentation here. And I'm going to call this one 1, which is just add a package. So we're just going to create a simple BIML package. We're just going to create a package with BIML. We're not really going to do anything fancy with it, right? And when we open this up, we see that we have a BIML open tag and we have a BIML end tag. And it looks like XML, right? It's an XML language. Excuse me. So the first thing we want to do is we want to clear that connection. So we're going to open up a tag and open up connections, and you can see that we have some IntelliSense here, which is extremely helpful. And if we hit tab and then we hit enter, we're going to get a close tag for it as well. And inside of this, I'm going to create our first connection, and we're going to call it connection, and we're going to say that the name is equal to our source, and the connection string is our connection string that we want to point to. And this is just the standard connection string information that we've always got. I've got it over here, and I'm just going to paste it in so you guys don't have to watch me type a connection string. So we can go on to some more exciting stuff besides that. And that is actually all that I need in order to create a connection just out of the gate. Now, I want to do something a little bit extra, and I have an optional flag, and we saw it on our presentation or on our slide a little bit. And inside of it, we have an additional option called create in project. And we can set this value to either true or false. And what this will do is we'll probably have time, we'll create it both ways. So if we set this to false, it's just going to be a package level connection, right? But if we change this to true, it's going to be a project level connection. So let's leave it to false for now, and let's just go ahead and generate our package. Let's see what happens. Oh, first let's create a package. I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. So once we have a connection defined, then we want to tell it that we want to create a package. So we're going to open up another tag. We've closed our initial connection node here, or a connection attribute, and we're going to create a package. So we're going to say that we want packages, and inside of our packages, we want to give it a constraint mode, which all packages are, right? All packages either have to be what's called linear or parallel. So linear means that everything is precedent on one another, right? So we've run a SQL task and then go do a data flow task, but don't do them together. Parallel, obviously, is the opposite of that, right? So then we could just say, I don't care what order you run the SQL and the data flow task in, just go run both of them. We're going to leave this for linear now, just because this is our first example, so we don't want to get super fancy. And we're going to say that the name is equal to my BIML package. And then additionally, we're going to set our protection level equal to encrypt sensitive with user key. That's just the default in SQL Server, so we're going to stick with that. Let's close this. And then there's the end of our package node. And now we've ended our packages, and now we're ending our whole BIML. So in about 2 minutes, we've created a connection, and our first package doesn't do very much. It's not going to, but we just want to watch it, right? So we're going to save this. And then once we've saved this, we want to right-click over here. And we have two options if we right-click on a BIML file. The first one is to generate our SSIS packages, and the third one is to check BIML for errors. BIML is one of those languages that you want to check a lot. The error kind of debugging for it is still pretty early in its infancy. So you want to check your BIML a lot as you go through. The last thing you want to do is write a nice, huge, long BIML script that goes and does the coolest thing in the world, and then go to generate it, and then have it pop up and tell you there's an error, and you've just now have to spend the rest of your day trying to figure out where that error is. So we want to check it for errors. We should get none. Yep, no errors or warnings were found. And now we want to right-click on it, and we want to select that we want to generate our SSIS package. And it went out to the engine and created an SSIS package. And here's our SSIS package, right? So not a whole lot going on there. Anything super exciting, but still kind of cool. We created our first little our first package. What we didn't do is we left our connection off here. So remember that we did not create our connection at the project level. So we lost it, and we're not using it anywhere, so it disappeared. But if we want to create this at a project level so that all of our packages can create it, because in 2012, remember, we introduced this whole project deployment model. And in the project deployment, all packages are related. They're all brothers and sisters and cousins of each other, so they all connect and they all talk, and we can just share one data source, and we don't have to worry about those XML config files and environment variables and all that fun stuff. We're done with it. So we can spend our evenings doing BIML. So we're going to say create in project. We actually want to change this to true. And if I save this and I rerun it again, this time when I rerun it, I should see my connection manager show up here. And it's going to ask me, it's going to say, you've already got this package, are you sure you want to overwrite it? And I'm going to say, yeah, I'm sure I want to overwrite it. And I should see my connection manager show up here. And it's wanting to be difficult on me. Let's do this. Let's just end it real quick. And for some reason it's wanting to fight me. So let's take a look here. I don't see anything off on it. All right, well, we will we'll do some cooler stuff a little bit later, and we'll pull that in. I apologize, I don't know why it's being a little bit ornate this evening. Must be the I must have given it too much freedom. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But as we look at our so coming back to our slide, as we come back, this is just creating our data source or our connection, right? So next, once we've done that, we want to create packages. So our packages are really what we're doing, right? The package element's defining what we're really going to be doing inside of BIML. Almost any package level property or component can be set in BIML. So something like, is there a question, Neil? Just saw one pop up here.
Yeah, we have a question. BIML created for, say, SQL Server 2005. How much work to upgrade to SQL 2014, 2016?
If you created the BIML, there would be, essentially there would be no upgrade path, right? If we come back and we look, you just need to download the Visual Studio version that you want, and this is one of the things that comes in the free version of BID's helper. There's a tool out there that Verigence makes called Mist, and Mist is a complete BIML designer engine that you can dynamically select and say generate these for 2005, or generate these for 2012, or generate these for 2014. If you don't have that, and it's an expensive tool, so many companies do not, then you just download the corresponding BID's helper add-in for your version. So in this case, I have the version for 2012. So if I were to, let's say my shop that I'm working at now, I'm working for 24 hours a pass. And pass says, Chris, we're upgrading from 2010 to 2014. You need to go regenerate all these packages. So I would just download the Visual Studio 2014 designer, download BID's helper on top of it, copy and paste my BIML code out of my 2005 solution and put it in my 2014 solution and regenerate the SSIS packages, and I would be done. This does not call that version and destination version indicator to assign the version until I actually right-click here and select Generate Packages. So it would be as easy as that. All right. Okay, so inside of our packages node, we have lots of different things we can set, right? We have expressions and variables and parameters and event handlers, and all these things are usable inside of BIML code. So we can bake our event handlers directly into BIML code. So if you're, let's say you're the lead SSIS developer, right, and you come up with this awesome template that everybody in the company should use, and now instead of writing SSIS packages, you're spending 4 hours a day going around explaining it to other SSIS developers about how to use this event handler and why to use this event handler and what they do and why they do it. We can bake this directly into BIML code, and then we just tell them pass in your query. We can make sure that everything adheres to company standards, right? So all ETL packages must have X, Y, Z in this event. And you can code it once and reuse it again and again and again. So let's go back over to our actual solution, and let's start creating some stuff. So we're going to create another BIML package here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say I want to add a new BIML file. And this time in my new BIML file, I'm going to expand this a little bit. So I want to say that I want to take my code and I want to, I apologize. I'm going to right click here, I'm going to select rename, and we'll say to that we want to add some variables. So we're creating our BIML package now, we're creating our package of BIML, and this is just the copy of the pasted code from the first line, same thing that we've already created. Then I just want to add a variable. So inside of my package, I have the initial pieces where I've created. I've said here's the name, here's the protection level, but before I end the package, so between where I've ended the attribute level properties around the package and before the package ends, I want to start adding some new stuff. So I want to add variables in here, and after I add these variables, I want to see my variable name equals, let's call it string simple variable. So nothing super complex on here, right? We're just starting out, and we need to assign it to a data type, so SSIS knows what kind of a data type that it is. And then we need to give it a value. So we're going to say that this is my variable. So we haven't really added that much, right? And as you're building BIML packages, this is one of the easier ways to do it too, is create a variable and then generate your SSIS package to make sure that everything that you think is going to happen is going to do it. It's also a nice way to prevent those afternoon sessions of looking for an error code, right? So if I right click here and I say that I want to generate my SSIS packages, it's going to ask me and say, do you sure you want to overwrite what you've already got created? And I'm going to say yes. And once I overwrite it and I right click here and select variables, here's my variable down here at the bottom of the screen. Let's move it up so we've got a little more space so we can see it. So we can see this time BIML went in through and created that variable for me. And I can create any kind of data type, and I can use expressions, and I can do whatever I need to assign these variables. And so far what we might be asking is, why not just create it by hand? We're not doing anything really anything fantastic yet. So this time I want to create a new BIML package, and inside of my BIML package now, let's start doing something fun. Let's move some data from place to place. So I'm going to right-click on SSIS packages, and I'm going to select paste. And as I select, I'm going to rename it real quick so we can keep it in order. And I'm going to say that I want to let's move some data. Moving some data. That's what SSIS is great for, and that's what we want to keep at it with, right? So as we open this, we've copied and pasted what we already have. So this is our existing piece now. And after our variables flow, now we want to start adding stuff. So we want to add on the control flow level, BIML processes things the same way that we would logically think about building an SSIS package. So we're going to start at the control flow, and then we're going to go to the data flow, right? So the control flow is the parent. So I'm going to create a task, and inside of my tasks, the first task we'll create will be an execute SQL task. So we're going to execute SQL, and let's give it a name, equals, let's truncate the destination table. So we'll do something simple. We're just going to truncate and reload. And we need to give it to a connection name, equals, in this case, we're going to point it to our destination. But it's highlighted in red because we don't have one. So I'm going to add a destination connection string in here. And I'm going to copy and paste it for you guys just so you don't have to watch me type in a destination connection string since we've already covered that. We'll try to go a little bit quicker. That way we don't rehash what we've already talked about. Oh, and it looks like we have an extra quotation mark here too. So let's get rid of that. And now let's create a what we want it to do. So inside of it, we want this to do a direct input. Oh, let's close. I apologize. We need to close our connection here. So close our connection. We want to do a direct input on it. And our direct input, we're just going to do a select one on this because we're just doing an example here and we don't really need to do anything special. We're looking for the execute SQL task. All right, so we've got our execute SQL, and now we actually want to move data within the data flow. So we're going to create another task. This time we're going to create a data flow. And inside of our data flow, we're going to give it a name. So, come on. Data flow name equals data flow. And my fingers are getting a little bit ahead of the IntelliSense on me. So we have our name there, and now we want to add some transformations, right? All data flows exist with a whole bunch of transformations inside of it. So once we've added this data flow, now we've got all the stuff that we're used to seeing in here, which is all the different stuff where we can come from sources and transformations and all that data that we want to push. So we're going to call it, let's start with an OLEDB source. So we're selecting our data. And we want to open up transformations. And OLEDB source. There it is. And we're just going to use IntelliSense here. And our name is equal to our OLE source. And we're going to assign it to a connection. So we're going to say that the connection name equals source. That's where we're coming from. And we'll close that. And as we have this, we'll do another direct input on this, as we're just going to pull some data. And direct input, we're going to select one as customer ID. So we're going to call this customer ID, and then we're ending our direct input. Now we're ending our OLEDB source, and we want to move it to a OLEDB destination. Right, so we're going to say, here's my OLEDB destination. The name equals OLEDest, DST. The connection name that it's assigned to is equal to destination. And we're going to set the maximum insert commit size just because I am a stickler and I do not like letting SSIS ever take on the assumption that it can choose that for me. I'm a bit of a control freak with SSIS with that. And then inside of my OLED destination, I want to tell it what table I'm going to in my destination. So I've told it to go to the destination connection string that, remember, I configured up here. So this is my name, and this is the connection string that I'm pointing to. So I'm pointing to my local data source, and I'm pointing to an operational data store that I've created, ODS. And inside of that destination, I have a table called sales.customer. So I'm going to say external table output, and the table equals sales.customer. This is my sales customer data. And then I'm going to end this OLEDB destination. I close my transformations tag, I close my data flow task, and I close my tasks, and then I close my package, and then I close all packages. And this is a key distinction here between these two. This is one package, this is all packages that I want the BIML engine to create for me. All right, so I'll save this, and then right-click, and I'm going to generate my SSIS package. It's going to ask me if I want to overwrite, and I'll click commit. And this is a Visual Studio thing where it's going to pop up and say, something changed the package and it wasn't me, so who was it, and are you sure you're okay with it? We're just going to say, yeah, we're okay with it. We know we did it. Is there a question before I leave the screen, I think? All right, so when I go into my BIML package, my Visual Studio's acting up on me now. Come on. Trying to save it. I apologize, guys. Trying to keep an eye on the time too, so there we go. Switch to. Come on. It's always in a presentation that Visual Studio is going to want to act up like this.
Chris, while we're waiting for your Visual Studio to play ball with you, a quick question there. Can BIML do everything I can do in SQL SSIS, where they use SSIS for more than just ETL into the data warehouse? So
yes,
can we do every task in SSIS through BIML?
So absolutely. So any task that you can do inside of Visual Studio, BIML can do. I'm using it here as an example because typically when it comes to repeatable processes in an enterprise, loading a data warehouse or a data mart is very, very common, right? I mean, that's something that everyone can kind of relate to, but it doesn't mean that that's all that it applies to. So if you have any repeatable process that you have, so let's say you're taking data from flat files and loading them to SQL Server, right? You can create a BIML package to do that, and then you just call the BIML package when you want to load it in, rather than needing to recreate that every time. So absolutely, there are anything that's on Visual Studio, BIML can accomplish, whether it's for each loops or loading from flat files in, or even moving data from Oracle to Oracle and you're just doing it with SSIS. You have the options there. Let's see if we can get it loaded. There we go. All right, so it's decided to come back to us. All right, so now when I open up my BIML package, now I see my connection managers that have shown up here with my projects, and I have my SQL statement that I created with my SQL statement inside of it, and I have my data flow task over here, which is just doing my select, and it's moving data from my source to my destination. All right, so pretty cool. I still haven't done anything really super complex, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to move a little bit quicker through the event handler piece, just so we can get to the making it dynamic level. So as I have all this data, now I've created these event handlers on top to track, right? And once I've created these event handlers on top to start tracking all this data, I can start looking at error runtimes and pre-execute and post-execute and all these different statuses. So I'm even just going to reuse my moving some data BIML piece, and we're just going to add in some event handlers down here at the bottom. So at the bottom of our tasks, because remember our task is at the control flow level, that what we want to tell it to do now is we don't want to mess with our tasks on the controller flow level, we want to mess with our events on the event handler level. So it's almost a different section of a package, right? Just like variables and tasks are. So after I've closed tasks, I'm going to come down here, I'm going to open up events. And I'm just going to create a very simple event to do an on-error handler to say log the error and push it into a destination somewhere. I'm even going to change audit to say destination. And once I rerun this, sorry, backing up a little bit, I want to show you guys at least what I'm doing. So we're opening up an event tag, and inside the event, we're declaring what type it is. So in SSIS, on my event handler, I have many different options, right? I have on pre-execute and on post-execute and on variable value changed and on warning and on error and all those different options for what I have. That's what that event type is going to allow us to notate. And I apologize for my Visual Studio being so slow. This is very atypical. So then I'm just going to set my constraint mode, same way I did at the package level. And then in this case, I'm just adding a very simple execute SQL task, exactly the same as we did earlier up here, in order just to demonstrate how we can do this. So once I got all this data in, right, now I've used it to create one SSIS package. That's great, but it doesn't really give me a whole lot, right? I could just as easily created that one SSIS package and been done, right? I would have taken me much less time. But where BIML's value really comes in is making it dynamic. And so by leveraging a tool, or by leveraging another language called either C# or VB.NET and SQL tables, we can get BIML to loop over a table and create dozens of packages all at the same time. So it will just loop through our table and create a separate SSIS package for each one that we need. And essentially what this allows us to do is become very effective with how our packages can be built, whether we're loading many dimensions or whether we're loading, maybe we have sensor data, right? And maybe we have 5,000 flat files all around the world, and we're trying to collect all that data and bring it in really, really quickly. We don't want to spend the time to develop 5,000 SSIS packages that are exactly the same. So we're going to use BIML to make this dynamic. And to set this up, what I've done is I've created a very simple SQL table. And I'm going to switch over to Management Studio. So inside of Management Studio, I have a database, and it's just called BIML. And inside of BIML, I've called it table gen in this case for table generation. And I'm just going to do a very simple select on it, and then we'll zoom in on it so we can see. And in this case, I've added some extra things that I want to do so I can iterate over and tell it which sprint I want to create packages for, what schema I'm coming from, and which one I'm going to. In this case, we're just doing simple staging packages. And I've assigned this as just kind of an internal indicator so we know what area it belongs to and why it's doing that. And then over here is the real kind of meat of what we're doing, is we're pulling this source query data. And this is the source query that we wanted to pull and push into our OLEDB source command. So I'm going to switch back over to our Visual Studio. And inside of it, I'm going to create a new SSIS package, or a new BIML file. And let's make it dynamic. So we're going to say that this is 2 or 4, and we're making it dynamic. So now we're going to start doing some cool stuff, right? Once I make it dynamic, I need to declare up at the very top what language I'm going to use so I can tell BIML this. So I'm going to delete out what's already in here, and I'm going to paste some code that I've already got generated. And I'm going to save it, and I'm going to close it, and then I'm going to reopen it. And the reason why is because Visual Studio right now thinks I'm still dealing with XML data, But essentially what I've done is I've switched this from being just BIML to being this variety language, right, between BIML and C#. So we've working together now. That BIML allows us to call these namespaces out of C#. But Visual Studio doesn't really recognize that. So we can see we've got a whole bunch of little red squigglies up here. So we're going to paste it, close it, and then I'm just going to reopen it again. And this time when I reopen it, we see all the red squigglies went away, and it's just been replaced with almost a notepad view of what it's going to look like. So when you're going to make a whole bunch of packages that do everything, make sure you start with one, make sure it works exactly the way that you want to, and then do this dynamic piece to it. So we're going to declare the template language that we want, and then we're going to import the namespaces that we want to call in this case. And then up at the top here, I'm going to call it a connection string metadata. And inside of my connection string metadata, I'm pointing to where that table is stored, same as all of my other connection strings. And then what I want to select. So I want to select out, in this case, my stages, and I want to do the first sprint, and I'm calling logical area plus the table name as my package name, and we can see this is just a simple select statement on a SQL Server, right? So nothing really fancy. And apart from that, if I look in here, this is exactly the same as what we've already created, right? And everything in here is essentially exactly the same as what we've already created. We've just added some variables to make our package names dynamic, to say when make the name of the table that I want to load down here the same as my qualified table schema name that I've assigned up here through a variable. And I've assigned this through a variable by pulling it from my my SQL result set that's coming back in. And so if I right-click on this and I select Generate, and I apologize, guys, I know I'm going a little bit quicker here. It's going to ask me, are you sure you want to reuse all these connection managers? Do you want to replace them all? I'm going to say, yeah, I'm sure I want to replace them all, so go ahead and commit. And then we can see in the blink of an eye, Visual Studio has gone through here and created all of these, in this case, source to stage, not even real dimensions, right, of everything that I want to see that I want to load this data from. And if I open them all up, I can see that the name of my data flow task is the name of the table that I'm loading, and I'm pulling from my table, and I want to load it to my destination, which is all being assigned to that variable. And this is the same for all of them. Now the one thing that I'm missing on this, which you guys might notice, is if I were to deploy this right now, all of these packages are sequential in nature, right? Just because that's the way that I have to call SSIS packages. They have to be called linearly in a SQL agent job. But I can just as easily add another package down at the bottom at the end to say that I want to create a master controller on top of it. So I am even just going to copy the code that I have over here. I'm going to add a new BIML file, and we're going to call this one Awesome Sauce. I'm a big fan of that. It's a little catchphrase. Came from a commercial a couple years ago, but I'm going to delete this because I know that I'm going to be iterating over it in a loop. I'm going to save this. I'm going to reopen it, so now I have a blank pad. And then I'm going to copy out all of my code, and I'm going to paste it in here. And this is exactly the same as what I had before. The only difference is that down here at the bottom, at the end, I've added an extra piece. So before I said, earlier, remember I said there's a difference between package and packages. So I said end that package and then end that for each loop. That's what this close squiggly bracket's doing. It's ending that package loop to do the for each loop over all my different stuff. Now I'm saying that I want to close that for each loop over all my packages, but now before I close all packages, I want to create a new package. And this package is going to be called a controller. Personally, I always like having my master controllers start with A or something so they show up at the beginning of the list inside of Visual Studio here. It's a personal preference. You could just as easily call it whatever you want. But we're going to set the same things that we set before, the constraint mode. We want this to run in parallel because we don't want all these packages to run one off of each other. But then inside of my tasks, I would just want to add a for every, it's the same for each loop that I iterated over before, so the same list of packages that I had. I want to implement an execute package task to call whatever the name of the package is, which is going to be that fully qualified table name that I've created. And then that's the end of my execute package task, the end of my loop, and then the end of my master controller, and the end of all of my packages. So if I save this and I generate it, it's going to replace what I've already got a lot. And it's just going to pop up and say, you've got all this stuff, you sure you want to replace it all? I'm going to say yes, yes to all. And this time I have a master controller package. And if I take this master controller package and I open it, I should be able to see all of my stuff show up here. And it looks like my Visual Studio is going to be a little buggy on me again here, so I apologize. But I see it looks like we might have some questions. And I apologize for the speed at which I'm going through the end. I'd love to go through it in much more detail. But are there some questions I can answer while we're waiting it?
Sure, Chris. Let's jump into some questions here. So first one I have for you is, can you copy code that was generated within SSIS into BIML? So as they're seeing as a lot of manual coding, or was that just kind of the demo you were demonstrating showing that?
So that was the demo that I generated. If we right-click on this, which I'll right-click on it here if we can, and we compare the code. Let's close out of this. There goes my Visual Studio. Yeah, it's just crashed. So I'm going to move over to my backup because a Boy Scout's always prepared, right? So I'm going to come over here, and this is exactly the same as the one we're just looking at. I promise I'm not doing anything fancy. And here's my master controller. But if I were to open up any one of these packages and right-click and select View Code, the code in here you can see looks a lot different than what I just created, right? And there's a lot more properties and outputs and components and all kinds of stuff that SSIS is doing within that XML that I didn't have to declare. And that's one of the beautiful things about BIML is that this is what made it very difficult to do this in the past, is that honestly you could do this 5 years ago where you could dynamically generate many SSIS packages. You can do it as far back as 2005 and 2008. The challenge was doing it through SQL. You have to declare all of these metadata columns, and you have to declare all this XML code that SSIS needs that a lot of it is just redundancy. So what BIML and what Verigence has really done is create this XML schema that essentially builds out the rest of it for you. So that's the long answer. The short answer is you can't copy it out of an existing SSIS package and just paste it into BIML. But on the flip side, once you've created it once in BIML, you can reuse it for as many SSIS packages as you need.
So I think that kind of maybe answered the next one, which was, could they convert existing SSIS packages easily across to BIML? So I think we kind of know the answer on that one as well now.
Yeah, unfortunately you can't. That would be something that honestly would be pretty difficult. You could probably go through here and try to identify what you're looking for, but you're going to have much more luck just recreating it in BIML. But I'll be honest, BIML is not an overly complex language to learn. Coming back to our slide a little while ago where we were talking about the schema on this one here, I left one or two things off, but apart from that, that's really the majority of the BIML language, honestly. It is not an overly complex thing to master. A couple of days and you should be able to get done anything you need.
So we've got about 1 or 2 minutes left here, so we're going to find a couple of questions for you. One of the questions is, can BIML be used to create packages dynamically during runtime of the parent package?
Can BIML be used to create, could you repeat that? Sorry.
So basically I think they're saying, can BIML be used to create additional packages during its runtime? So create like child packages.
Yes, it can. And that master controller kind of shows what it's doing, right? So it's all going to be about how many loops you wind up having inside of your, essentially however you want to call C#. Anything you could do with C# and SSIS and just looping over, and you could loop over all of this when you're done and create more packages. There's probably a trade-off at some point of convention over configuration, right? That original question of how sophisticated do you want to get with it? So I'm sure that you could.
Okay, so I think probably kind of looking at the time, we probably need to wrap things up. I'm going to take it. Chris, can you move over to the final slides that we have?
Oh,
So remember, the
sure.
recording for this session is going to be available on 24hoursofparts.com. So if you missed part of the session or you want to go back and rerun through some of this stuff, then that recording is going to be up sometime next week, I believe. So thank you for attending BIML, Rethink Your ETL. I'd like to thank Chris for his time and definitely his expertise. Again, I'd like to also thank for our presenter and sponsors, Microsoft, Cisco, and Dell Software, and also all the supporting sponsors, SQL Sentry, HP, and SolarWinds. So we do hope you enjoyed this session as much as we did. Follow along on social media with @20past24hoursHop and share your thoughts on the event hashtags #past24HOP and SQL Pass. And again, Chris, thank you very much for your time today. It's been awesome to listen to some of your insights on how to use BIML to rethink your ETL.
Thanks so much.